Ethan Collins had spent years building his empire, surrounding himself with power, wealth, and absolute control. His life was carefully structured, every decision calculated. Nothing ever surprised him. Until the night his doorbell rang. When he opened the door, he expected a business associate, a security issue, maybe even an unwelcome journalist. Instead, he found her, Claire Watson, the woman he had walked away from years ago. And in her arms, clutching a small toy car with striking blue eyes that mirrored his own, stood a 6-year-old boy. "We need to talk," Claire said. And just like that, Ethan's world changed forever. Ethan Collins sat alone in his grand mansion, the silence pressing in on him like an invisible weight. The house was massive, a symbol of everything he had built: power, wealth, and control. Every detail was designed for efficiency, for luxury, for a man who needed no one. And yet, for all its grandeur, the house felt empty. He had spent years constructing the perfect life. His company was one of the most successful in the country, his financial empire unmatched. People respected him, feared him, envied him. But no one truly knew him. That was how he preferred it. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim glow of the chandelier above. The quiet should have been comforting, a reward for his hard work. But tonight, something felt different. Then the doorbell rang. Ethan frowned, glancing at the time. No one ever came to his house unannounced. His security ensured that. If someone had made it to his front door, it was either a mistake, or something serious. Setting down his glass, he rose from his chair and walked to the door, his step steady, controlled. He didn't rush. He never did. When he opened it, his breath caught for the first time in years. Standing there was Claire Watson. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had walked away from when his career had demanded all of him. Her dark brown hair was slightly windblown, her brown eyes holding something unreadable. But it wasn't just her presence that shocked him. In her arms was a small boy, no older than 6. Ethan's sharp blue eyes immediately locked onto the child. Dark brown hair, thick and slightly messy, but the eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were his. His heart pounded, but his face remained expressionless, a skill he had mastered long ago. Claire didn't move, didn't say anything right away. She just stood there, holding the child close, as if bracing for impact. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was steady but carried a weight that told him this wasn't a casual visit. "We need to talk." Ethan's grip on the door tightened. He didn't know what she was about to say, but he knew, deep in his gut, that his life was about to change forever. Ethan stepped aside, allowing Claire and the boy to enter. His mind was racing, but his expression remained unreadable. Years of business negotiations had trained him to mask his emotions, to never let anyone see what he was truly thinking. But this was different. Claire walked in cautiously, holding the boy's hand tightly as if afraid he might disappear. The child clung to her, his small fingers wrapped around hers. He was quiet, but his blue eyes darted around the massive foyer, taking in the towering ceilings, the marble floors, and the grand staircase that spiraled upward. Ethan shut the door behind them, taking a deep breath before turning to face Claire. "Explain," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Claire inhaled deeply, glancing down at the boy before meeting Ethan's gaze. "His name is Lucas," she said. "He's your son." The words landed like a blow to the chest. Ethan's grip on control faltered, just for a second. His gaze flickered to the boy, who was now staring up at him with those unmistakable blue eyes, his eyes. He felt the air shift around him, the foundation of everything he thought he knew suddenly unstable. "You're lying," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Claire lifted her chin, her expression unwavering. "I wouldn't be here if I was." Ethan ran a hand through his blonde hair, exhaling sharply. "Why now?" Claire hesitated. She looked down at Lucas, as if choosing her next words carefully. Because I don't have much time left, she finally admitted. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around Lucas's. I have cancer, she said. It's aggressive. The doctors say I have months, maybe less. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly unprepared. The room suddenly felt too big, too cold. He had expected anything, an old debt, a desperate plea for money, even revenge for how he had walked away from her all those years ago. But this? His eyes flickered to Lucas again. The boy had no idea what was really happening. He was watching them both, trying to read their expressions, trying to understand why his mother's voice had changed. Ethan forced himself to focus. And what do you expect from me? Claire straightened, meeting his gaze head-on. I need you to take him. Ethan stiffened. What? I need you to raise him, she said. He has no one else. My sister refused. My parents are gone. When I'm gone, he'll have no one. Ethan shook his head, 1,000 arguments forming in his mind. I don't know how to be a father. Claire let out a breath, a bitter smile crossing her lips. Neither did I. But I learned. And so will you. Silence stretched between them. Ethan looked at Lucas again. The boy hadn't spoken a word. He just held his toy car tightly in his hands, standing there, waiting. Ethan wasn't sure if he was waiting for his decision, or if, deep down, he already knew what it would be. Ethan felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. He had faced boardroom battles, ruthless competitors, and high-stakes negotiations worth billions. Yet, standing in his own home, faced with a 6-year-old boy he had never met and a woman telling him he was a father, he had never felt so unprepared in his life. Claire stood firm, her expression determined but laced with exhaustion. She had always been strong-willed, but now there was something else in her eyes, urgency, desperation. She wasn't here to negotiate. She was here because she had no other choice. You can't expect me to suddenly become a father overnight, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside his mind. Claire let out a slow breath. I don't expect miracles, Ethan. But Lucas needs someone. And whether you like it or not, that someone has to be you. Ethan turned his gaze to the boy. Lucas hadn't moved. He was holding his small toy car so tightly that his knuckles were turning white. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, falling into his striking blue eyes, eyes that mirrored Ethan's so perfectly it was impossible to deny the truth. Does he know? Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. Claire hesitated, glancing down at her son before answering. No. He knows his father was someone important, but I never told him it was you. Ethan clenched his jaw. Why? She met his gaze without flinching. Because I wasn't sure you'd want him. And I didn't want him growing up feeling unwanted. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. He had spent years building a life where emotions were a weakness, where attachments were liabilities. But now, looking at the small boy in front of him, hearing Claire's words, he realized the damage his choices had already caused. Lucas, Claire said gently, kneeling beside her son. Sweetheart, remember how we talked about your daddy? Lucas nodded slowly, his small fingers still gripping his toy car. Claire glanced up at Ethan, and for the first time that night, he saw the slightest hesitation in her expression. She was scared. Not of him, but of what this moment meant. She turned back to Lucas and took a steadying breath. This is him. This is your daddy. Silence. Lucas's blue eyes widened slightly as he looked up at Ethan again, this time with new understanding. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just stared. Ethan felt something heavy settle inside him. He had spent years keeping his life in order, maintaining control over everything. Yet, in this moment, he had none. Lucas shifted slightly. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but then he clamped them shut again. His small hands trembled just a little, and he held on to his toy even tighter. "Are you mad?" Lucas finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to push through the storm in his mind. He knelt down to Lucas's level, his towering presence suddenly feeling too overwhelming for the small boy in front of him. "No," Ethan said, his voice quieter now. "I'm not mad." Lucas studied him carefully. "Mommy said you were very busy." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I was." Lucas blinked. "Are you still too busy?" The question hit him harder than it should have. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. Claire was watching him closely, waiting, hoping. Ethan glanced at Lucas's small, nervous frame, at the way the boy shifted from foot to foot as if bracing for rejection. And in that moment, Ethan knew there was only one answer. "Not anymore," he said. Lucas's grip on his toy car loosened just slightly. He still looked unsure, still cautious, but there was a flicker of something else in his expression now, hope. Claire let out a slow breath of relief. Ethan knew this was just the beginning. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know what it meant to raise a child, to be responsible for someone other than himself. But as he looked at Lucas, at the son he had never known, he realized that for the first time in his life, he was about to take on something bigger than any business deal, bigger than any empire he had built. And there was no turning back. Ethan had never been a man who doubted himself. Every decision he made, every risk he took, was calculated with precision. He had built an empire by trusting his instincts and never looking back. But now, as he stood in his own home, staring at the 6-year-old boy who had just learned the truth about his father, Ethan felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Lucas had barely spoken since Ethan's quiet admission. He stood close to Claire, his small hand still wrapped around his toy car as if it were the only thing anchoring him in this unfamiliar situation. His blue eyes, so much like Ethan's, flickered with emotions too complex for a child to fully understand. Claire finally broke the silence. "It's late. Lucas needs to rest." Ethan nodded, grateful for the temporary reprieve. "There's a guest room down the hall. I'll have someone bring anything you need." Claire hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Thank you." Lucas followed his mother as she led him out of the room, but just before disappearing down the hallway, he turned back to glance at Ethan once more. It was brief, hesitant, as if he were trying to decide what to make of this man who was suddenly his father. Ethan watched them go, exhaling slowly. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, memories, and questions that had no immediate answers. He turned back toward the living room, walking over to the sleek bar where he poured himself a glass of whiskey. He didn't usually drink this late, but tonight was an exception. The alcohol burned his throat, but it didn't clear his mind the way he had hoped. Instead, his thoughts drifted to Claire. To the way she had looked at him when she told him she was sick. To the way she had said Lucas had no one else. He closed his eyes briefly, pressing his fingers against his temple. This wasn't just about a child in need of a home. This was his son. The weight of that realization settled deep in his chest. He had spent years believing that love, family, and attachments were distractions, liabilities in a world where only the strongest survived. But now, he was being forced to confront something bigger than himself. A quiet sound pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, and there, standing just a few feet away in the dimly lit room, was Lucas. The boy's bare feet barely made a sound against the polished floor as he shifted uncertainly, his small figure dwarfed by the vast space around him. He was clutching his toy car tightly, his grip tense. Ethan set down his glass. "Couldn't sleep?" Lucas shook his head. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, filled with things unsaid. Lucas hesitated before taking a small step forward. Do you live here alone? Ethan wasn't sure why that was the first question the boy asked, but he nodded. Yes. Lucas frowned slightly, as if trying to understand. It's really big. Ethan smirked slightly, though it faded quickly. It's supposed to be. Lucas looked around again, his small fingers tightening around his toy. It feels empty. Ethan wasn't sure why, but that statement hit him harder than he expected. Lucas hesitated before speaking again. Did you want me? The question was soft, hesitant, but it cut deeper than anything Ethan had ever heard before. He inhaled slowly, forcing himself to push past the sharp sting of guilt that suddenly crept up his spine. He knelt down so that he was at eye level with the boy. I didn't know about you, he admitted honestly. If I had, things would have been different. Lucas studied him for a long moment, then glanced down at his toy car, running his thumb over the plastic surface. Mommy said you were important. Too important for things like this. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had spent years chasing success, believing that it was the only thing that mattered. And now, standing here, looking at the son he never knew he had, he wondered how much of his life had been built on the wrong priorities. I was wrong, Ethan said finally. Some things are more important. Lucas looked up at him again, his blue eyes searching. He didn't say anything, but after a few seconds, he nodded as if accepting that answer. Ethan watched as the boy turned slightly, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Can I stay here? The question was so small, so quiet, but it made something inside Ethan tighten. You don't have to ask, Ethan said. This is your home now. Lucas bit his lip, considering that, then gave a small nod. Okay. He didn't say anything else. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the hallway where his mother was sleeping. Ethan watched him go, feeling something inside him shift. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel quite as empty. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Collins knew that no amount of power or wealth could ever compare to what he had just been given, a chance to be a father. The next morning, Ethan woke earlier than usual. He wasn't sure if it was because of the conversation with Lucas the night before or because, for the first time in years, he wasn't alone in his house. Either way, he found himself sitting at the kitchen counter, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He had never spent much time in this part of the house. The kitchen was modern, sleek, and barely used. His staff usually prepared his meals, but today, something stopped him from calling them. He didn't know much about kids, but he knew one thing: he couldn't just pretend Lucas wasn't here. The sound of soft footsteps made him turn. Lucas stood in the doorway, his dark brown hair slightly messy from sleep, his blue eyes still groggy. He clutched his toy car in one hand, rubbing his eyes with the other. Morning, Ethan said, surprised by how different his own voice sounded, softer, less controlled. Lucas hesitated before stepping further into the room. Morning. Ethan studied the boy, noticing how small he looked in the vastness of the kitchen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was strange, this quiet tension between them, both aware of what had changed but unsure of how to navigate it. Are you hungry? Ethan finally asked. Lucas nodded. Ethan exhaled, standing up. What do you eat for breakfast? Lucas shrugged. Mom usually made pancakes. Pancakes. Ethan frowned slightly. That wasn't something he had ever made before, but how hard could it be? He moved to the cabinets, searching for ingredients. Lucas climbed onto one of the stools at the counter, watching him with curiosity. Do you know how to cook? Ethan smirked. Not really. But I can follow instructions. He found a box of pancake mix and read the instructions. He wasn't used to doing things like this himself, but something about it felt necessary. Lucas rested his chin on his hand. Mom never used instructions. She just knew how to do it. Ethan glanced at him. There was something in the boy's voice, admiration, nostalgia, maybe even sadness. "She sounds like she was good at a lot of things," Ethan said, cracking an egg into a bowl. Lucas nodded. "She was." Silence stretched between them, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. Ethan focused on mixing the batter while Lucas watched, occasionally offering advice. When the first pancake sizzled in the pan, Lucas leaned forward slightly, clearly invested in the process. "You're not very good at flipping them," he observed after Ethan fumbled the first attempt. Ethan chuckled. "I'm better at running companies than making pancakes." Lucas smiled a little, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in his expression relax. A few minutes later, he placed a plate of slightly uneven pancakes in front of the boy. "Tell me if they're edible." Lucas took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. Then he nodded. "They're not as good as Mom's." Ethan smirked. "Didn't think they would be." "But," Lucas continued, taking another bite, "they're not bad." Ethan took that as a win. They ate in relative quiet, but it wasn't the same awkward silence from the night before. This time, it felt normal. Almost like something was beginning to settle between them. When Lucas finished, he set his fork down and looked up. "Are you really going to take care of me?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He swallowed his last bite before answering. "Yes." Lucas studied him. "Even when it gets hard?" Ethan exhaled. "Even then." The boy was silent for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Then he nodded, as if accepting that answer. "Okay," Lucas said. Ethan wasn't sure why, but that single word felt more important than anything he had ever signed in a boardroom. He had just made the biggest commitment of his life. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. The transition wasn't smooth. Ethan had spent his entire life structuring his days around efficiency and productivity. He had never had to think about anyone else's needs outside of business. Now, there was a 6-year-old in his home, and every moment felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. Lucas wasn't difficult, but he was quiet, watchful. He didn't ask for much, but Ethan could see how uncertain he was. The boy was still adjusting, still trying to understand what this new life meant for him. The first real challenge came that night. Ethan had been in his office, catching up on emails, when he heard a noise down the hall. A soft creak, then a faint shuffle. He frowned, pushing back from his desk and standing up. When he stepped into the hallway, he saw Lucas standing near his bedroom door, his small fingers gripping the edge of the frame. His teddy bear, one Ethan hadn't even noticed before, was clutched tightly in his other hand. Ethan's frown deepened. "Lucas?" The boy hesitated, shifting slightly. "I had a bad dream." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. He had never dealt with this before. His instinct was to tell Lucas to go back to bed, that it was just a dream, that everything was fine. But something about the way the boy stood there, his blue eyes uncertain, stopped him. Instead, Ethan took a slow breath. "Do you want to talk about it?" Lucas hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Ethan nodded. "Do you want to go back to bed?" Lucas looked down at his feet, gripping his teddy bear tighter. "Can I stay out here for a little?" Ethan glanced toward the living room, considering. He wasn't used to having someone else in his space, let alone a child. But he couldn't send the kid back to his room, not when he clearly wasn't ready. He nodded toward the couch. "Come on." Lucas followed him quietly, climbing onto the couch while Ethan sat in the chair across from him. The boy curled up with his teddy bear, tucking his feet under himself. Ethan wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. He had no idea how to comfort a child, how to make things feel normal when nothing about this was normal. So he just sat there. Minutes passed in silence. Eventually, Lucas's breathing evened out, and his eyes began to droop. Ethan thought about taking him back to bed, but then the boy shifted slightly, mumbling something in his sleep. Ethan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. He wasn't good at this. He didn't know how to be a father. But as he watched Lucas sleep, something settled in his chest. Maybe he didn't have to know everything right away. Maybe just being here was enough for now. Ethan had never imagined that his life would change so drastically in such a short amount of time. He had always operated on a strict schedule, his days planned down to the last detail. But now, every morning started with something new. Sometimes it was the sound of tiny feet running down the hall, sometimes it was an unexpected question over breakfast, and sometimes it was the realization that he had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Lucas was still adjusting. He wasn't difficult or demanding, but he was cautious, as if still unsure whether this new life with Ethan was something real or just temporary. One morning, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, Lucas climbed onto a chair across from him, swinging his legs slightly. The boy had a serious expression, his toy car resting on the table beside him. "I have to go to school, right?" Lucas asked. Ethan glanced up from his laptop. It wasn't a question he had been expecting, but it was an obvious one. He had been so focused on getting Lucas settled that he hadn't even thought about what came next. "Yes," Ethan said. "You'll need to start soon." Lucas nodded slowly, tracing his fingers over the smooth surface of his toy car. "I went to a small school before. I liked it." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I can find you a good school here." Lucas hesitated, then looked up. "Will you take me?" Ethan wasn't sure why that question hit him the way it did. It was such a simple request, but something about the way Lucas said it made Ethan realize how much it meant to him. "Yes," Ethan said. "I'll take you." Lucas seemed satisfied with that answer. He picked up his toy car and ran it along the edge of the table, his expression thoughtful. "Do you work all the time?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What makes you ask that?" Lucas shrugged. "You always have your computer open. Mom used to say you were busy a lot." Ethan exhaled, setting his coffee down. "I was. I still am. But things are different now." Lucas studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay." Ethan didn't know what to make of that response, but something about it felt like progress. Later that day, he found himself making calls, arranging for Lucas's school enrollment, speaking with his attorney about the guardianship process, and adjusting his own schedule to make room for something he had never prioritized before, time. That evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Lucas turned to him suddenly. "Are you still learning how to be a dad?" Ethan glanced at him. "Yeah," he admitted. "I think I'll be learning for a long time." Lucas nodded as if that answer made sense. "I think you're doing okay." Ethan smirked. "Just okay." Lucas grinned. "Maybe a little better than okay." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And for now, that was enough. The morning of Lucas's first day of school arrived faster than Ethan had expected. He had spent the past week arranging everything, meeting with administrators, making sure all the paperwork was handled, and, most importantly, adjusting his own schedule so that he could take Lucas himself. He wasn't sure why that part had felt so important, but it did. Lucas sat at the breakfast table, quietly eating a bowl of cereal, his blue eyes occasionally flicking up toward Ethan. He had been unusually quiet all morning, his toy car untouched beside his bowl. "You nervous?" Ethan asked, setting his coffee down. Lucas shrugged, poking at his cereal with his spoon. "A little." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "It's okay to be nervous. It's a new school, new people. It'll take time to get used to." Lucas nodded but didn't say anything. Ethan watched him for a moment, then glanced at the clock. "We should get going. Don't want to be late." Lucas slid off his chair, grabbing his backpack and the toy car he never went anywhere without. Ethan had thought about telling him that he might not be able to bring toys to school, but something stopped him. Maybe the car was a comfort, something familiar in the middle of so many changes. The drive was quiet at first. Lucas stared out the window, watching the city move past. Ethan had taken the morning off to do this himself, something that still felt foreign to him. Halfway to the school, Lucas finally spoke. "You won't forget to pick me up, right?" Ethan glanced at him, surprised. "Of course not." Lucas didn't look convinced. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. "Has someone forgotten to pick you up before?" Lucas hesitated. "Not really. But sometimes Mom was late when she had doctor stuff." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. Claire had probably done everything she could to make Lucas feel safe, even while she had been fighting her own battle. "I'll be here," Ethan said firmly. "Right on time." Lucas gave a small nod, looking down at his toy car. When they pulled up to the school, kids and parents filled the sidewalks. Ethan parked the car and got out, walking around to Lucas's side. The boy climbed out slowly, gripping his backpack straps tightly. For the first time, he really looked small. Ethan knelt down beside him, lowering himself to Lucas's level. "You'll do great today," he said. "And I'll be right here when school's over." Lucas hesitated, then, to Ethan's surprise, reached out and wrapped his arms around his neck in a quick but tight hug. Ethan froze for a second, caught off guard. Then he slowly placed a hand on Lucas's back, returning the hug just as carefully. Lucas pulled away just as quickly, adjusting his backpack and straightening up. "Okay," he said, as if convincing himself. "I'll see you later." Ethan watched as he turned and walked toward the school entrance, his toy car still in his hand. For the first time in his life, Ethan Collins understood what it meant to be responsible for someone else, not just financially, not just legally, but emotionally. And as he stood there watching his son walk into his future, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going anywhere. This story is more than just a tale of a wealthy businessman discovering he has a son. It's a journey of redemption, unexpected love, and the realization that true success isn't measured in power or wealth, but in the connections we build. Ethan Collins begins as a man who believes he has everything, until he is faced with the one thing he never planned for, fatherhood. At first, he resists, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know how. He has spent years avoiding attachments, believing they were a weakness. But as he gets to know Lucas, he realizes that love isn't a distraction, it's the only thing that truly matters. Lucas, on the other hand, is a child who has lost his mother and is suddenly thrown into a life with a man he has never met. He is cautious, unsure of where he belongs, but despite everything, he is open to the possibility of trust. His quiet strength is what ultimately changes Ethan, not through force, but through the simple, undeniable truth that he deserves to be loved. The beauty of this story lies in its imperfect journey. Ethan doesn't become a perfect father overnight. Lucas doesn't immediately embrace him. There are moments of doubt, miscommunication, and struggle. But in the end, they choose each other. Not because they have to, but because they want to. The final moments, with Ethan watching Lucas walk into his future, solidify his transformation. He has spent his life believing he was in control of everything, only to realize that the most important decision he ever made was one he never saw coming. This is a story about change. About second chances. About how love, even when unexpected, has the power to reshape a life. And in the end, Ethan doesn't just gain a son, he gains a reason to truly live.